on?
Yes.
Sound good? Oh, good. Thank you. So, we all know Pat and what a fabulous individual he is. We've come to love him. He and I began to kind of dream a little bit together about what would it be like for us to do something here together in a dialogue form. And just as I was sitting here, I was realizing this will probably work best if there's 2 chairs up here for us to sit on. I'm serious. Can we? Yeah, Mike, would you mind just grabbing one and the other? And Pat and I will like each other well enough to sit close.
Yeah,
You got 2? Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. How San Francisco is this? That's excellent. Well done. Should have thought about this. So Pat and I think, can I tell the story about the email back and forth?
Sure.
Okay. So Pat and I were talking after services 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I was telling him about a cartoon that I used to keep taped to my door in my office when I was pastoring in a traditional church. And it was a sketch of 2 men that were talking. One of the men was introducing himself to this other person who was apparently a guest and a visitor. And the gentleman who was doing the greeting was saying, "We want you to know we love you here in that manly moose-killing way we have." And so I told Pat that, and of course we got a chuckle out of it. And I wrote Pat and confessed to him that I really did love him. And at the bottom I put the footnote, "No moose were harmed in the making of this email." So we wanted to talk with you just a little bit and to share our journey with you. I hope that you find something meaningful out of this. Maybe you can all put the parts together already. But Pat and I come out of a traditional Christian environment, and we've found ourselves in a non-traditional. Dick Hood was smart enough to do it the right way first time out, so he's taking a seat today as we're in the Inquisition. But one of the things I wanted to do is to offer ourselves up for you, and maybe there's no script here. We don't really know where we're going. So if this is a successful hour, then you can thank me for it. If this is a disaster, it's Pat's fault. So one of the things I wanted to do is start by asking Pat and also responding to the same. What was it like for you, Pat, to make this journey away from a traditional Christian setting, Christian ecclesiastical structure, and then stepping into this place? What was that like for you, and what were your thoughts as you were making those journeys?
Well, Charlie, I sincerely look forward to answering your question. But before I do, I need to point out that for Christmas, my daughter, my spiritual daughter, and Gabriel's biological daughter, Kathy, gave me some Charlie Tyler socks. And I'm tired of being upstaged by Charlie's socks. These socks say, "I'm kind of a big deal." When I was a traditional Christian minister, I had 2 huge challenges. One of which was I did not believe in eternal damnation. And I led a rural United Methodist church comprised primarily of former Baptists. And the reason they were former Baptists is a lot of them had gone through divorces. And divorce is highly frowned upon in the Southern Baptist tradition, so they just came over to become Methodists. But they still hung on to eternal damnation. They really liked the idea of a God who would be willing to deep fat fry people they didn't like in their lives. And I really struggled with that. And they would, yes, Lynn?
Right here, Pat, you need to put that microphone closer to your mouth.
Closer to my mouth.
Did you turn it on?
Oh, turn it on. You guys are so detail oriented. So many details to cover. I left the United Methodist Church delighted to no longer have to answer the question, do you believe in hell? And when people would ask me that, I would say, well, it's a story. And somehow that satisfied them. I don't know why. I never said yes or no. I didn't believe in hell from the time I was 18 years old, because I had a college professor who explained to me that hell is not real, even in the Christian texts. The Christian texts have been perverted and mistranslated, and Jesus never intended to send all the Muslims to hell, or in the Muslim worldview to send all the Christians to hell. That was not the intention of the one we find in the New Testament. So that was a delightful transition for me, to be able to come away from eternal damnation. And then the other issue was LGBT equality. We brought a lesbian couple into our congregation in the rural United Methodist Church. And when I left, those two women were asked to leave the church. It was very sad. The good ending to that story is they became Unitarian Universalists too. So we keep picking up people who've been cast out by other traditions. So that's wonderful. What about you, Charlie? What was it like for you to come out of a traditional Christian environment?
So in mine, as most of you know, I was set in a much more conservative environment. My postgraduate degree was from a very conservative, highly classically trained background, 5 years of Greek, 2 years of Hebrew, the studies of the philosophies and the historians and all those things that came with being able to, quote unquote, handle Scripture. That's what we were trained to do, is to handle Scripture, to be authentic with it, to understand it, to be able to pick up its flow and deliver it. And so because of that, the issue of literal biblical inerrancy was critical in our thinking. Probably not so much from your background, but it was very much so in mine. And I had these odd questions in my mind, but I never really quite let them come fully formed into my head until one day, and I really don't remember exactly how this happened, I came across a quote by Francis Collins. Does anybody recognize that name, Francis Collins? Yeah, Human Genome Project. He's a pretty smart puppy. But one of the things that Francis did is he also occupied an evangelical space in his world. He speaks as an evangelical, but he fully embraces the evolutionary trend that science reveals. He walks on both sides of those. And so I was curious to read about him and then to see his quote endorsing a book that I promptly ordered. The book was called Coming to Peace with Science. And I was thinking to myself as I ordered it that if my faith and if my belief structure was as strong as it needed to be, then I could read a book like this and it would not damage me. And here I am. So some of you have heard me tell this part of the story, and the reason why I mentioned the New Testament Greek is that there is some forms of criticism that's a part of New Testament work. There's what's called higher criticism and lower criticism. Lower criticism is a part of what we did a lot of when we were working with the New Testament. And what that meant was that we would find where there was errors, copyist errors that would creep into the original text or to the oldest text 200, 300, 400 years after the death of Christ. And you could trace where the errors crept in, and then you could trace where those copies went as those errors showed up in different parts of the Mideast. Fascinating study. But as I was reading through one of the chapters on DNA in the book, which is of course one of the things I was really brought to, I was reading some instructions about how it is that scientists know that a mouse and a whale are more closely related to each other than others that you might think. And I thought to myself, well, I'll bite. So I read on through, and they start talking about the markers, the DNA markers. They don't necessarily change anything, but the markers are always shifting, always changing. And people who know these kinds of things are able to track those markers inside different DNAs and see where the connection is made. And as I was reading that, the thought came to me, that's just like lower textual criticism. And the next sentence said, that's just like lower textual criticism. And I was won over. by that time. So I started the book over. I was reading it in my office. I had to put it in front of my Bible so I could. It looks like it's like, you know, you got girly magazines, but it's a scientific journal that I'm reading. And so that began my journey until I finally reached a point. And basically, it really came down to whether or not I could affirm, as my old congregation, my old denomination mandated, that I could no longer affirm a literal six-day creation. And that meant that I was no longer them at that particular point. Of course, everything else begins to crumble after that too, or come back together, depending on your perspective. And I went to my leadership and said, I'm not you guys. And they said, oh yeah, you are. You know, and they tried to talk me into it. I said, no, I fully embrace evolution as taught by scientists. Oh, I was told. So they very kindly and graciously released me, and I went on my way and pursued some training, of course, in hospice. Most of you know that I'm a full-time hospice chaplain. And I pursued that career, and I'm doing that now. But through a series of circumstances, I have landed here. And coming here, as you've heard me say, coming here has opened my heart. It has really opened my heart. And then the first time I heard my friend Pat speak with that fabulous upcountry southern drawl, I thought, I have died and gone to heaven. Last thing
You know, when Jimmy Carter was elected, a lot of us said, we finally have a president who doesn't have an accent. One of the things, Gordon Stamler asked me, he said, what is it like to be talking about these issues, talking about spirituality, talking about tradition, talking about religion in a place that is so different from where you came from? And what I keep coming back to is my beliefs have not changed. I still believe in things like peace, like food for hungry people, like an end to cruelty to animals. I believe the same things I have always believed. And I find that Jesus that I find in the New Testament is not that different. I'm still with the same Jesus. I'm still, for better or worse, with the same Buddha. But I discovered that I got in trouble with the Methodists when I tried to talk about Buddha. I did my second son's wedding, and his wife was from a very traditional Lutheran family. And during the ceremony, I mentioned Buddha. And unfortunately, most of her family was seated on the dais. And when the word Buddha came out of my mouth, all of their jaws dropped. Why is he talking about Buddha? But my beliefs...
They thought you said Bubba.
Maybe they did. But the core beliefs that I brought from childhood are unchanged. And I believe, now some of y'all are going to think I'm crazy when I say what I'm about to say, but a lot of you already thought I was crazy, so we're not lowering or raising the bar. I really believe my parents are in heaven with Jesus. And I believe when they look down from the balconies of heaven, they're okay with this. They're okay with Unitarian Universalism. I remember one time at our Spartanburg congregation, this huge man showed up. Big man, big beard, long black hair. And he stood up at Joys and Concerns and he walked to the microphone. And he said, my son has been coming over here and meeting with you people. And I was worried about it. But he said, I've come over here and I've kind of listened to what you have to say, and I've listened to your songs and your stuff, and I like you fine. You're just fine. And he sat down, and I think that's where my mom and daddy are, and that's where my grandparents are. Everything's okay.
You know, when I began to make my way into this particular environment and breathe the air that's in this particular place, I really began to sense that change from having absolute answers to being real comfortable with questions.
Yes.
That's a part of the liberation that I had begun to feel. Every once in a while when I was having conversations with very close friends back in my other world, and I would reveal a peak, just a little bit of a peak. I remember one of my friends said, "Oh, you're not liberal, you're just liberated." And I went, "Well, okay." I took that, but as I find it here, and again in the atmosphere that we're breathing in this room, and the way that we speak to each other, and the care and concern that we offer each other, we're in a different place where who the person beside you is way more important than what you think, what you think they believe, or what they think they believe. The dignity of that individual is of more value than any of that other stuff. And that was something that was a radical shift in me, to be able to embrace that and to walk in that and to know that that's the value that's here, is being able to say that man, that woman, this life we're living together is really important, and value the human spirit that's behind it, and value the person that's there. That's very helpful for me in the work that I do on a daily basis, but here in this place, it's just such a freedom. I don't have to explain anything. There's an individual that I know. He doesn't know much about me. He was telling me with his current wife. He's an older gentleman, but he said to me, "You know, we got married in a hurry, and of all things, this Unitarian married us, and I still can't get over I let that happen, and I went and got it redone." So I just nodded and said, "I understand." I understand. So there's a struggle in that.
I got to spend most of the last 2 days with Gordon and Lynn, and I know those of you who know Lynn Nordenberg know that she is an absolutely wonderful human being. And let the record show that even Gordon was applauding. And I was sharing with Lynn that often at the Greenville Church, what I would say to the UUs is, we are the Church of Red Skelton. Because Red Skelton would close every one of his broadcasts with, all we really have in this old world is each other. And that is so true of us. Because you're not going to be confronted in the lobby after this service over biblical inerrancy. You're not going to be confronted with whether or not you believe in a literal physical resurrection. About the only thing you're going to be asked is, would you like a cup of coffee? And that is such an embracing, accepting, radical difference. People who are on other spiritual paths, they can have those spiritual paths. I'm not saying they're wrong, although on specific theological points I might disagree with them. But they've got to do what they've got to do. They've got to swim in the water they're swimming in. But my hope, and Ralph Waldo Emerson's hope, is that eventually they'll come on over and be with us. Emerson said in 200 years, everybody will be a Unitarian. We've got about 50 years to go, so we need to get busy.
We're going to need more chairs. Carol. No? Yeah. There we go. There we go. You know, place is probably 90%, 95% full right now. So there's something that's happening here. One of the things that I began to realize in my own personal journey about especially this word called faith, those of you who are perhaps steeped in a more traditional Christian setting know how important that word is. Sola fide, you know, it's by faith alone, one of the great tenets of the Lutheran background, Martin Luther's great tenet, among others. And so what I found happening, an odd paradox, when I kind of woke up one day, and I realized that I was really no longer holding on to faith, I was holding on to facts. Which meant I wasn't actually walking in a faith. Now there's a paradox.
It is.
When you begin to realize, this movement, this conservative literal movement, is only about the facts that they think are true, not necessarily the faith that's required to believe them. And as I began to take a different walk and to turn a different way, I began to realize that, weirdly, my faith was beginning to change. And it was actually becoming more what I defined as faith, which is resting on something that I can't see or know. I use the word, and some of you have heard me say this before, I use a word now to describe my faith, and that word is suspicious. Is there a God? I'm suspicious. Does he love me? I'm suspicious. That's the kind of way that I begin to exercise my own journey. That may change before the end of the day, but I've been comfortable with that for a little while now. And because I don't want it to be a fact. It needs to stay faith in order to be that thing that it really needs to be. In order for me, again, paradoxically, to honor it, it has to be in this way. Did you experience that too, Pat?
I'm not sure I understood everything you said, Charlie. The thing, as I've been preparing for this morning, I have been totally intimidated. Because I told Charlie when he first proposed this, I said, Charlie, you can speak extemporaneously. I always use a manuscript. And I brought 3 pages with me this morning because I was afraid the whole thing might fall apart. And it hasn't yet, but what I do discern from what Charlie just said is that we stand in the presence of mystery. And we, as tempting as it is, I sometimes say to my folks back home, listen, y'all, I understand this stuff. If you'll just listen to me, I'll explain it to you. But I'm being facetious. I know what I'm talking about of my experience. But when I try to rip the page out of my heart and hand it to you, something is lost in translation. And I fear this is one of the great losses of our brothers and sisters who are in church this morning down the road. I've told this story often. I've probably told it here. In our Spartanburg congregation one Sunday morning, we had a talk back, had a little discussion group together. And this young man was standing there wearing a golf shirt and blue jeans. And he said, every one of us in this room believes something different. And we're okay with that. The problem for the folks down the road is they all believe something different too, but they have to lie to each other that they all believe the same thing. And it's a radical difference. I remember in local pastor's school in the United Methodist Church, there was a young man there who was studying to be a minister, and he wept. He wept to recall walking across the campus of Southeastern Theological Seminary and being stopped about every 15 or 20 yards and asked, do you believe in biblical inerrancy? What about this passage? What about that passage? Is it true or is it factual? And then he would walk another 15 or 20 yards and somebody would say, what about the literal, physical, historical resurrection? Is it true or not? And it was such an averse, confrontational atmosphere that to recall what he went through brought him to tears. He sat among us and wept at the memory. It's that harsh. It's that hard.
I guess for those of you that are here now, and Pat and I can go on until Tuesday. We won't do this. There's some really cool music that's been scheduled. We want to leave time for that. But one of the things I would say to you, the congregation, one, thank you for letting us into your world.
Yes.
It's an honor to be here. Really, it really is. And the other thing too is to allow yourselves to grow on each other, grow with each other. Pour open your hearts, open up your spirit, and offer each other what you have to give, because that's the thing that's of real value in this room right now, is each other. And I thank you for the privilege that we have to be able to stand in front of you.
Absolutely.